this one. So good evening. It is my honor to welcome all of you tonight for a very, very special evening. I'm Julián Zugazagoitia, the director of and CEO of the Nelson-Atkins, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of our board chair, Shirley Bush-Hellsberg, all of the trustees, the volunteers, and the staff of the Nelson-Atkins, to our celebration of creativity. Tonight we have three very different experiences and reasons to celebrate. There is the opening of our feature exhibition on Ferran Adrià, Notes on Creativity, which explores the notion of innovation and creation through the culinary arts, and how he, as a chef, has used drawings and design as a way of communicating and documenting and eventually also creating incredible dishes. He was renowned for the El Bulli restaurant that for many years got the award of the best restaurant in the world. And as a man that what he wanted to do was always create a dish that had never existed before. At one point, 2-3 years ago, he decided to close the restaurant and create a foundation to think about food, because he felt he could not innovate or create one more dish. So the level of self-excellence on the one side and drive is amazing. And I hope you all join us for the lecture that he's going to be giving in this same auditorium. And you will see, as I define it when I met him, is I thought I was walking into Diderot and Rousseau when they were inventing the encyclopedia. His mind, it's about everything at the same time. So there is an interesting talk there too. So something to work and look for. The other exhibition that was created by our curator of the Nelson is called Jump In. It's a very engaging architecture exhibit, and it is our first exhibition on that matter. And the reason that Catherine Footer created and was responsible for that exhibition has been responsible also for the exhibition of, many of you will remember, the World's Fair Design Exhibition. And the importance of that exhibition on the one side, the opening to design architecture. I don't know if some of you remember the pavilion that was on the south part of our park. That some pavilion excited our thinking about architecture, about engaging even more with the architectural field, and that has been so rewarding. And not only have we seen her as a curator flourish enormously and engage in many, many activities from historic to contemporary art. Some of you might have seen some of the curator. The last show that we had in the special exhibition space was also curated by her. So in that, and is Catherine here or she's still in the cocktail place? Well, it's good that she's not here, because then I can reveal to you that she's going to get a promotion. And she's going to be promoted as the senior curator of European art, and that will encompass all of our European arts, both sculpture, paintings, also design. Architecture will still be on her responsibility, and all of the Western tradition. Really the tradition that our founder and the first gallery that he created even before creating the museum, Mr. Nelson, called it the Gallery of Western Art. And that happened when this city was very small and we were in downtown and there was a library, and he created with replicas. So that's another story. But Catherine Footer will now be responsible for all of that, and if you want to translate it in real estate, it's almost all the first floor of the Nelson-Atkins. So even in her absentia, where she's having drinks celebrating, please congratulate if you see her. The other thing is, and very important, that we're celebrating tonight more specifically, and it's this third element, and perhaps the most important one, because it deals with our collections. What we're celebrating is the reinstallation efforts that have gone into creating the African galleries to the level that have never been before. And the importance of working and looking at our permanent collection is something that every museum has always to take care of constantly. And we did that thanks first that we have a great curator of African art, and that is Nikwa Kompom. And when he started visiting the Nelson, and maybe some of you remember 5 years ago when we had his show called Through African Eyes. It was one of the greatest shows that we have presented. And he was visiting from Detroit, where he's also chief curator. And we started engaging in a long series of conversations. He was so generous with his time, with his vision, incorporating also oral docents in some of the conversations. And little by little, we started a conversation is how could we share his wisdom and his treasures with us? And today we share, and we are blessed that he has made such an impact in Kansas City in a very little time. And so this African galleries are more welcoming, more densified. So on the one side, also what is attributed is that it is almost an acupuncture. It's very light, and yet you see a difference. And we measure the difference in many ways. We never closed the gallery, so we could do this reinstallation while we were still open. But if you come on a Saturday or a Friday, you see more people in these galleries than we had before, but also they spend more time. So people are really sensing that there is much more to see in these galleries. And that's one way that we see it. Nothing would happen if we didn't have, and this kind of galleries is a long endeavor. And the Nelson applauds the commitment and also the dedication of two families, the Hall family and the Hellsbergs, who have really been key and instrumental in funding this phase of renovation. So I want to thank, on behalf of all of us here at the Nelson, the Halls and the Hellsbergs for this. We also have a great distinguished group of individuals who have loaned as well as donated key objects for this restoration, enabling us to tell a deeper story and a more coherent story. And that is also what we're always trying to look to give and fill in holes in our collections. We have enjoyed the key support and goodwill of members of Kansas City community who have enhanced this project in several ways. Inspired community partners like Christine People, a group of community members known as Family Time Advisors Group, help plan and run the Explore African Art Families events. We also work with another group of people, including our extraordinary mayor, Sly James, with his wife, with Reverend James Cleaver III, to create a video that interprets also the galleries and people's response to them. So you will see a lot of people interactions, and those videos capture personal experiences with our collections. The galleries, of course, we have the favorite masterpieces, but also showcase new objects, and I hope all of you can identify which ones are the new that we have. And those new objects really fill in very important gaps. And it's, as I said earlier, the lifeblood of every museum to enrich our collections for generations to come. And so many have made this museum not only a jewel in our community and our region, but one of the top museums in the nation. And this, I want to take this moment to thank those who, without this restoration and the excellence of the galleries and the collection of African art, would not be possible. And I want to definitely ask you to help me recognize the two most ardent, and I've already mentioned the Halls, and if I were to mention someone that has had the most impact on this institution is, of course, Don Hall and his family. But more importantly, I think when we're talking about African collections, that is the most intimate and perhaps the most personal contributions, insofar that many of the works that are here are works that normally live in his home and how much he appreciates and what a personal relation has with each and every pieces. So it is amazing that we can have on loan and long-term loan some of those pieces here. The galleries bear the name of the Hellsbergs, the Hellsberg family galleries, and it is a tribute both to their commitment and long-standing commitment to this institution way before we have that opportunity of renovating. And so we are also so enchanted that we can really bring these galleries to new light as they have been today. The project also attracted, thanks to the fact that we were bringing new light, many new donors, and donors that were on the brisk of making decisions. And we have included, I think in the last years, more than 600 objects into our permanent collection. So that is a testament also of having a dedicated curator that looks and people are more interested. So I want to signal out among the donors Ed and Laura Tranning, who donated a large number of objects that really fill incredible gaps in our collection. Others will include Robert, Bina, and Dolores Bina that have not only helped us in African art, but also in Native American art, great friends of the institution, and also Dr. and Miss Fulton, who have contributed to making this installation amazing. As you can see, if my works and remarks are long, is because it is always a lot of people who make an institution like this thrive and be successful. And I want to conclude by congratulating also the staff, the dedication of our team to make an incredible installation, and one that is interpreted, and the experience through the education department to how to look at art is amazing. And I want to, all the staff is involved in everything we do. I want to particularly point out Rachel Kubaka, Steve Waterman, Ambers Mills, Susan Pedersen, Melissa Mayer, Chris Holley, Bob Todnay, Brandon Wilcox, Tim Graves, and James Schwartz, who have been really instrumental on making it come to life. But none of this would not be realized again, and please help me welcome to the stage to introduce our great speaker of tonight, the curator whose vision has helped us illuminate the path to a greater reinstallation. Please help me welcome Dr. Nii Kwakompom to the podium and congratulate him for this.
Thank you very much. It is cold outside, so it's great to see all of you here today. Hank Willis Thomas received his BFA in photography and Africana Studies from NYU in 1998 and went on to complete an MFA in photography and MA in visual and critical studies from California College of the Arts in San Francisco. Today, Thomas is a practicing artist living in New York City who works in photography, video, sculpture, and mixed media. He is also an installation and conceptual artist. His work deals primarily with ethnicity, history, and commodity culture, focusing on themes related to perspective identity, media, and popular culture. He often incorporates recognizable icons in his work, many from well-known advertising and branding campaigns. In recent years, he has expanded his practice to include text-based pieces, interactive installations, and reworked and repurposed arts. But he is best known for shrewdly connecting the commodification of African-American male body today via sports and advertising with that of the slave trade. Thomas has exhibited in galleries and museums in the US and abroad, including the Goodman Gallery in Johannesburg, Galerie Michel Ryan in Paris, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Cleveland Art Museum, among many others. His work is in numerous public collections, including Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. His solo exhibitions include Question Bridge, Black Males in 2013, What Goes Without Saying 2012, and Pitch Blackness 2009. He has also been part of several collaborative projects that have received prestigious funding support from the Tribeca Film Institute, Open Society Foundation, and the Ford Foundation. He has permanent installations at the Birmingham and Oakland International airports and the Oakland Museum of California, San Francisco. His work has also been featured in several publications, including 25 Under 25, Up-and-Coming American Photographers, and then 30 Americans. Thomas has served as visiting professor in the MFA programs at Virginia Commonwealth University, Maryland Institute College of Art, and has lectured at Yale University, Harvard University, and the Birmingham Museum of Art. After today, the Nelson can proudly say that we've also can be mentioned among the fine institutions that have hosted him. Personally, I'm excited to announce that through the kindness and generosity of Shirley and Barnett Hellsberg, the Nelson now has on loan to the newly reinstalled African Gallery one of Thomas's finest works, absolute, no return. Considering the lack of visual images dealing with the slave trade in African visual art, I particularly welcome this masterpiece in the gallery as it constitutes the missing puzzle in a broader discussion of Africa's long history of interactions with the West. Thomas's take on the subject of slavery fleshes out complex historical facts with great nuance and skill, blurring the lines of race itself while also recognizing how ethnically, culturally, and professionally diverse people are. This takes his work, as one writer puts it, and I quote, well beyond just making art, to examining and exposing deeper divides in our culture. For his accomplishments, it came as no surprise to many when New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio recently nominated him for one of the painter seats on the Landmarks Preservation Commission and Public Design Commission. Incidentally, and I'm very, very happy to announce this, today too, the International Center of Photography, ICP, also announced that Thomas is included among recipients of its 2015 Infinity Awards for his work on Question Bridge blackmails. Yes, when it rains, it pours. I am sure we haven't seen the best of Thomas yet, so please join me in welcoming to the podium Hank Willis Thomas.
Wow. I almost forgot he was talking about me. Seriously. I was like, who is that guy? Why does he do so much stuff? It's really, really great to be here, and I guess I don't need to introduce myself. But I actually was thinking about talking about being an artist, and I did a project last year based around video footage and speeches and radio interviews of James Baldwin, and I figured it might be appropriate to start with this quote, this excerpt, I should say.
It seems to me that the artist's struggle for his integrity must be considered as a metaphor for the struggle which is universal and daily of all human beings on the face of this terrifying globe to get to become human beings. What we might get at this evening, if we are lucky, if the mic doesn't fail, my voice holds out, if you ask me questions, is what the importance of this effort is.
I really think that being an artist is, the pursuit of an artist is equivalent to the pursuit of having a meaningful life. And it doesn't matter if the artist does one great work or no great works, or no one ever likes anything they've ever done. I think we need all of us to do all the work all the time. And I think about that because I think about equality and equanimity and the importance of making work regardless of whether or not anyone cares or wants to see what you have to do. Because I know that my life is heavily influenced by this book, which was a collaboration between two already renowned artists, photographer Roy de Carava and author, poet Langston Hughes. It's called The Sweet Flypaper of Life. And it was a portrait of African-American community in the 50s, combining the photographs of de Carava and the text of Langston Hughes. And my mother, a 12-year-old little girl, came into the Philadelphia Public Library and saw this book. And it sent her on a life journey, which sent me on a life journey. It was the first time she'd seen pictures of African Americans depicted as people, really, in publication. And she had this feeling that there were probably more, that it wasn't a coincidence that African American photographers would make images that looked more familiar to her than the images that were seen in mainstream society. So when she got to school, and how many people here are in school? Good, a good amount of the room. Her junior year in college, she had already been studying photography, and photography was not yet even considered art, but it was making its way. And she asked her professors about African American photographers, and they could only name three: Gordon Parks, Roy de Carava, and James Van Der Zee. And so she proposed, as you can see here, this independent research project, Black's Contribution to Photography, 1840 to 1940. And what sticks out to you about 1840 America? Anybody? Slavery. And what does it mean for us when we start to think about black photographers making work as early as 1840, which is the year photography was invented? Doesn't that make us question all the narratives we have about the black experience? The fact that there were 25 years before the end of slavery, people of African descent at the cutting edge of technology, using physics, chemistry, creativity, actually trying to capture the world. And this was her first list, and you can see a number of photographers, but that list expanded to dozens more, which became her first book, Black Photographers, 1840 to 1940, a bio-bibliography. And then her next book, Black Photographers, 1940 to 1988, then Reflections in Black, and then dozens and dozens, actually dozens and dozens of books. This, because she realized that a huge part of history was being systematically erased, and that African American photographers were still making the work and making history regardless of whether or not the canon appreciated it. And so I've been picking up where she's continuing, and it's hard to keep up. So I made this piece called Sometimes I See Myself in You, which really speaks to that reflection in our relationship, and also in like me going places and people saying everywhere I go, even today, a friend of your mother says hello, which you can imagine how easy it is to give a talk when you're like, okay, somebody who knows my mom is going to tell her what happened. But it hasn't stopped me from stealing. I tend to appropriate things, and I sometimes say if I could ever appropriate an artist statement, it would be this, which is a quote from Carl Hancock Brooks in a book called Everything But the Burden. He says, there's something called black in America, and there's something called white in America, and I know them when I see them, but I will forever be unable to explain the meaning of them, because they're not real, even though they have a very real place in my daily way of seeing, a fundamental relationship with my ever-evolving understanding of history, and a critical place in my relationship to humanity. And this quote, written by an African-American who's actually speaking about Eminem, I guess, and really made more sense to me when I left the United States, and actually when I went to Africa, and started to realize the complexities of blackness on the continent where there's so many people and so many cultures, and how limiting a term like blackness and dumb it is in that context. But also looking at what blackness can mean in American Apparel ads like this. And I wonder sometimes where the roots of these are, and the roots of this one might be connected to this. And everyone knows who this is. Who's Bert Williams? He was the what? He was a vaudeville black performer who performed in blackface. And it's funny that virtually no one in the room knows who he is, because he was at the time the most famous African-American performer and a very important benefactor, influencer of black artists in decades to come. But I find it so amazing the way that he performed and demonstrated blackness when he was off stage, and the way he was celebrated for his performance of blackness on stage, and wondering who he was performing for and why. But also thinking about how things change and what the status quo is at one point in time, and how these status quos flip and change, and sometimes we don't even really notice. So my work is really often looking at kind of what's right there and trying to think about what it would mean in the past. And so I think about logos sometimes as hieroglyphs, and how these potent images that we use and interact with every day could actually tell a different story when applied differently. And so I really, in this early work, which I call Branded, was trying to use advertising, which I realize is probably the most powerful language in the world, because it is so ubiquitous, and you don't necessarily have to speak a certain language to actually read the advertisement, because we've all become subconsciously media literate. And thinking about slavery, and how slaves were branded as a sign of ownership, and how so much of popular culture, especially in sports and entertainment and apparel, has been fueled off of the branding of black bodies, and how we all today live in an age of branded consciousness with our iPhones and our whatever else. I could name a dozen things, and I see a dozen things on you guys. And wondering kind of what that means, and how I could use that language to talk about different things, and thinking about how for some people the idea of ascending is chained to ascending through sports and entertainment, and how the society of the spectacle, its relationship of how black bodies are seen in triumph now, but those same bodies might have been treated differently in the past. Or on the college football field, where you see the descendants of slaves who work for free, often on the same fields that their ancestors worked for free on, and it all being connected to cotton and apparel. And it really was started here with this image. My interest in using advertising a way to talk about things came from this moment where my cousin was murdered, and I couldn't take a picture at his funeral that said everything for me. And the heaviest part for me at the funeral was preparing for the funeral, where we had to get the new suit and new socks and all of these weird things that I didn't realize were part of it. And then we were in the funeral home, and there was the $7,000 casket and the $5,000 casket and the $2,000 casket. And there's this unspoken thing that if you buy the $2,000 casket, you couldn't afford to love them enough. And so if you buy the more expensive one, you love them that much more. And it was this impossible decision for me to watch my family make, but also to think about how even in mourning, we're still being marketed to. And I've in many times shown this work in different places to different responses. And last time I was here, I should say, when I was part of an exhibition at the H&R Block space in 2009, and I came here, and this museum has grown exponentially since then, so congrats to you all for all of your hard work. Last time I showed this, my PowerPoint crashed. And so I decided not to show the video that I was going to show, but it's really, I should say, it's really fascinating and amazing to see how much appreciation for art in the public realm, for art spaces, has kind of grown all over the country, and I'd say all over the world. I don't know what we put in the water to get people to appreciate art in different ways. I think before you were an anomaly if you were involved in art, and now you're kind of a leader, and I think we should all appreciate that. And I digressed totally, but I needed to say that. And I say that because sometimes we do forget how important the work is that we do. And thinking about how simple gestures can change the context, I wanted to, in this piece called Absolute Power, embed my own 2 cents into that famous Absolute campaign, where they used the bottle to say so many different things. I thought about what if I could kind of graph onto that other things that I think about and deal with, and thinking about the construction of black people, because 500 years ago in Africa, there were no black people, there were people, and there were thousands of different languages, thousands of religions and worldviews and perspectives, and blackness really is a fabrication that came out of commercial need. In order to turn people into property, you had to create a subhuman brand. And so they kidnapped people, packaged them into ships, and sent them halfway across the world and told them they're all the same. And when we look 500 years later and we see so many people still struggling and wrestling with what that really means, to me that's absolute power. And thinking about kind of where that began, I photographed the Door of No Return in Goree Island, which is part of the African galleries here, which I was so excited to see, because I was speaking just earlier this week about the importance of intersectionality in museum displays, that work that was made a long time ago is still relevant and is in conversation with work that's being made today. And so I was really honored to see on social media first where my work was placed, and surprised, and it's really exciting. But thinking about how this commodity culture of today can speak about commodity culture of the past, and windows to the past and windows to where we are now. I've dealt with that a number of ways. As an African American, people often ask me where I come from, and saying I'm from New York is sometimes not enough. And saying my family's from Philadelphia or Virginia and even South Carolina is not enough. So I created this piece called The Place to Call Home, Africa, America, because as I've traveled all over the U.S. and traveled to several places in Africa, I realized that my locale is probably a no place or an imaginary place, and so I wanted to actually make it for those who ask. And I deal with this idea of hybridity in my work in a variety of ways. This is a collaboration with an artist named Sanford Biggers, who's a wonderful artist who has some work up over at the Kemper Museum right now. And his work is often about hybridity. He lived in Japan for several years. He's went to historically black college, and but also has gone to majority, minority, whatever. I hate talking about these things in these weird ways. But he's a person, and I believe that in all of us, there are many identities that aren't seen on the surface, and the blurriness is what I try to deal with in the work. So I make these works that when you look at them dead on, they're blurry, and then from the side, they're clear. And I like this idea of making work that, depending on where you're standing, it affects what you see. And sometimes in the work, you actually have to move to see it. And this really speaks to what happens every time we look at anything. It's all your fault. It's all my fault. This fact that nothing is static, that things change, and reminds me of how I could use historical images to speak to the present moment. Because when I made this image, when I first encountered this image, I was shocked. It's an image by Ernest Withers taken in 1968 during the Memphis Sanitation Workers March, the march where Martin Luther King was assassinated in support of. And I found it, up until very, very recently, or until recent events in the state even, I found it astounding that people in the United States had to stand collectively just 8 years before I was born to affirm their humanity. Because the phrase that I grew up with wasn't "I am a man," it was "I am the man." And I was fascinated how it went from this kind of very collective statement during segregation to this very selfish statement through integration. And I wanted to remix and riff on that in a number of ways. And I saw the last kind of line as a poem where it says, "I'm the man, who's the man? You the man, what a man. I am man, I'm human, I am many. I am amen." Because I realized that rather than trying to validate myself on anyone else's value standard, that the greatest gift that I'm given, that any of us are given, is our consciousness. And so I really wanted to express that with this work and kind of think about how we can look at these issues in a variety of ways. And so I'm happy to say that now at the H&R Block space, there are several of these paintings that are on exhibit in the show called Making Histories. So it's great when you come here and I have work hanging in two places. But thinking about, as I continue to grow and think about photography and history and place, I started to make these photographs that use historical photographs and embed them in mirrors to kind of encourage the viewer to think about the surrealness of certain moments where these children were being arrested as looters during the Watts riots after Martin Luther King was assassinated, or this picture that's become very famous of Amelia Boynton at the Selma March, wondering to what degree I could find a greater connection to these historical moments and these images that seem somehow so distant. So I started to actually take moments or slices of photographs and tried to render them in three-dimensional space. So I'll take a photograph. This is a photograph of someone who was being arrested in South Africa during apartheid in 1990, and they're sticking their arm through the breathing hole of the police vehicle. And I thought that was such to make the symbol of solidarity. And I thought that was such a potent and powerful statement because we know that the apartheid police weren't the nicest people. And for someone who's already facing that level of violence and antagonism to put their arm through, how many of us would ever put our arm through something we don't know what's going to happen on the other side? And we don't know who's going to see it. This is that gesture of, it really is a performance. It really is making art. And that the power of that really struck me. So I wanted to make this hyper-real piece that speaks to just that little slice of it. So Roland Barthes talks about the punctum, which is a fancy way of saying that thing in the picture that you like, that which sticks with you. And so I wanted to start to crop. Every photograph is a split second of a time, and can everyone just do this with me? All right, and then close your eyes, and then open them for 1 second and close. That's a photograph. And if you can learn anything in that much time, which a photograph is like a 15th of a second, you can't see anything, nothing happens. And we take them as documents, as true, as reality, and we embed all this meaning in them, but it's really a narrow slice of what happens. So I wanted to start to make work that speaks to that, but also to give us a chance to walk into a photograph. So it's cropped, but it's also three-dimensional. And so we have this almost phenomenological experience related to it. And these are primarily of protests, this is of people who were burning their passbooks during apartheid when the government enforced them to carry passports. And if you were caught without your passbook, you could go to jail for 5 years. And I thought people collectively kind of going into this infinity, I thought was amazing as a powerful gesture. And there's also a photograph by Ernest Cole. I had a show in South Africa, and I was really interested in 20th century photographs there. And I don't have the photograph on my computer for some reason, but it's a photograph of miners being strip searched during apartheid South Africa, and you can see their butts and their arms are up in the air. And I always felt when looking at the pictures, like when I look at pictures of lynching, I feel guilty. I feel like I'm gawking to some degree, and it bothered me. And I wondered if there was another way to represent that image and make it potent. So I cropped the image at the shoulders, and all of a sudden the picture could speak to other things. And I titled it "Raise Up," because rather than it being about them being kind of humiliated and undervalued, that perhaps it could be seen as a baptism, as something else, as a protest. And just 6 months later, we know what happened here, or not far from here, even though over there they say you're very far from here. There's the events in Ferguson gave this picture new meaning. I think of this sculpture as a picture. And I was kind of fascinated about the symmetry that happens, because I'm talking about how these things can have a new meaning, and then a new meaning is birthed in history and the present moment. And I've become really fascinated with how these intersections happen. And I had a show in Berlin soon after, and wanted to deal with 20th century photography in Berlin. And some of the work I did was these sculptures in Germany, I should say. And this sculpture is based off a photograph of children's hands on barbed wire in Auschwitz. And I thought it was just such an intense thing for people to witness, and for that to be a reality, that I wanted to document it. But then some people mentioned to me that it's much like people in refugee camps all over the world today. So even though I'm trying to talk about the past, I keep wind up talking about the present. And wanting to push that in different ways, this is a piece that is based off of the moment when the Berlin Wall was coming down, and there was someone standing on top of the bridge, the wall, touching someone who's on the ground. And that there's this potency of that gesture and of that moment that I think is so beautiful about the touch and the interaction and the generation difference between the people's hands. And I started to realize how much I can get back to the things I love about photography, which is, it used to be for me that photography was tactile, that I was putting rolls of film in, and I was developing film, and I was actually in the darkroom developing pictures. And it got to the point where now that doesn't really make that much sense. And I became so removed from making my own pictures that I started to use other pictures. And now I feel like I'm starting to get back to that place. But speaking to a variety of things, now going back to thinking about sports as this stage for so much that is important that happens in the world, but also seems trivial. And wanting to talk about that moment, the tip-off, when the tension of every game starts off and goes to that. And I realized that when you can take something that seems banal and then put it in a museum or a gallery, and all of a sudden it becomes important. So I started to make part of my work this process of taking everyday things. So this is based off of a pin for a fight for the thing I love most about Muhammad Ali is he speaks to that I am a man, that one's will can actually overpower pretty much anything. The fact that a person from he was born poor in a segregated state of Kentucky, and decided by the age of 20 or 22 that people would define him as the greatest. That he didn't say, I'm the greatest boxer. He said, I'm the greatest of all time. And there's such an absurdity to that statement, but he made us believe it, even as we've watched him deteriorate over the past 30 years. He's still the greatest. And I thought that was such an absurd gesture that I wanted to kind of make an absurd kind of reference to it by making this huge 3-foot pin. And I started to think about how these pins that seem so kitsch, that people used to wear a lot and now we rarely wear, but that when you wore them, you wore it close to your heart because it really spoke to things that you really stood by and believed. And I thought that was powerful. And so I wanted to make these larger-than-life renderings of them that go into these public spaces. And in the back, you see that it actually is a button. And my friend almost lost his hand trying to put one on the wall the other day. And when I went to South Africa, using pins from the ANC, or looking at in Chile, protesting in Pinochet, I found these pins in South Africa protesting what was happening in Chile. And that really spoke to the global conversation in the fight against injustice, and how that's not as small as we think it is. And even in Africa, people cared then about what was happening in South America, and what was happening here, and what was happening in Europe. I think about these things because it changes my understanding of history. History is so often seen as this one-dimensional narrative, and it's really an infinite conversation. And I wanted to, with these works that are based off of quilt patterns that are, the legend has it, what many people on the Underground Railroad used to send messages to escaping slaves. And I started making quilts out of college football and basketball jerseys, and wanting to think about kind of what that code could mean. And as I started thinking more and more about these codes and bringing it back to photography, I wanted to comment on that. So this is it's funny because in Missouri, so much of this stuff that has happened came from Missouri. That Missouri was kind of like the horse that broke the camel's back. So it's interesting as I think about things, makes me think more about the context of where I'm speaking and what happened. Because anybody know what was happening on this land 200 years ago? What was happening? Do you know? If time is like, you can like, time is relative. Like, does anybody know what was happening here? This was Little Dixie. What's that mean? Yeah. That was 1821, right? The Missouri Compromise. So we're coming up. When was it? 1820. So we're coming up 5 years. It'll be 200 years since then. I'm sure you'll be talking about that a lot here. But 100 years ago, this is a picture from Alabama, actually, Tuskegee, and it was a Booker T. Washington lecture, and a collective of African Americans were standing there, and this is the generation that migrated from the south to the north, and the pattern that you see of these 8 triangles that are almost going in a circle was called flying geese, and the message was follow the geese that are migrating to the north. And so I started to want to use these codes. This is bow tie, but I'm using an image of a baptism, and I'm wanting to start to make these connections between photography and the quilts and the patterns, but also helping us to remember that greed doesn't have a color preference, that we so easily and so often forget that in the United States, it was commonplace for white Anglo-Saxon children to be doing pretty much the same labor of people of African descent. And I'm so curious why it's not really anything I ever really think about. I always think about in my narrative that white people always had it good, and then we created this horrible term, poor white trash. You know why I hate that term? Because there's no such thing as black trash. So when you say poor white trash, it's like, whoa, they're worse than you. It's like that doesn't. I've had so many people say that to me as if I'm supposed to feel good about it. But there's something that really sticks with me about this image, because this person's children and their grandchildren for sure are still alive, and this element of American history is thrown away, and I think we could learn a lot by looking at it. And so with some of the public work I've done, this is an installation at the Birmingham International Airport where I was commissioned to make a piece with some friends about Alabama, and I called it The Long March because I realized how much history and the past and the present are always in conversation in ways that we don't really notice or expect. And this is the steel mill. This is the industry section, so you see a child in the cotton mills, but also a steel worker. And what happens with the piece is that the history and the present collide. So on the right is the NASA moment, and you see that filtering in, and it's this kaleidoscope, and it's just this really beautiful piece that is meditative. It's like 45 minutes, and I had this opportunity to go through the Library of Congress and all these other catalogs just to put these images that are boxed away back into the public. And it's a real privilege as an artist to be able to do certain things like this. This is a moment that speaks about the civil rights era, and there's Fred Shuttlesworth, who the airport is named after, and Ralph Abernathy goes in right after him, and then Martin Luther King right after that. And I love making work that really transcends my own expectations about a way to tell a story, because I don't really know all of what it means, but it does really embed itself in my memory, and that every time I go back to see it, I can see something else, even though I made it. And I really, with a lot of work, have started thinking about, so I started this project, Question Bridge Black Males, with a few friends, and it's what we call a video-mediated megalogue between African-American men, and we wanted to show that there's as much diversity within any demographic as there is outside of it. And we started off trying to make a documentary, which we never really did, but we made a video installation, an interactive website called questionbridge.com, which you can go to now, a curriculum, community engagement events. And what really happened for me, and as why I wanted to do this project, is I've struggled throughout most of my life to define what a black male is. And I figured that if anybody knew, it would be other black men. So by asking them to ask and answer each other's questions, I thought that I'd get a whole answer, but actually I wound up with more questions. Uh-oh. Here's a trailer from it. Can we turn this light down? Thank you.
Black man.
Do you want to get out of the situation that you're in?
What is the reluctance for taking responsibility for improving our communities?
Are your children better or worse off as a result of your involvement?
Why wouldn't you be happy with your son being gay?
Why are you so violent?
Why do you have that take mentality?
Why are you afraid of being intelligent?
Why?
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 Why? What I want to know is why.
I believe that we've incorporated a lot of things that are unhealthy to us.
We are supposed to be tough.
I can't let him see no type of sucker.
Along with various other stereotypes.
The level of mentorship in our community is not as strong as it possibly could be.
When I came up, crack was a quick way for a black man to make $1 million.
Sometimes I think because we think we're black, we're some other kind of human beings, but we're just like most other human beings.
Why didn't y'all leave us the blueprint?
We did leave you a blueprint.
We just didn't tell you where it was.
That's something that we dropped the ball on.
What do you fear?
That something will harm my children.
I fear success.
Am I the only one who has problem eating chicken, watermelon, and bananas in front of white people?
I don't know, bro. Y'all niggas crazy.
That word, we have to stop using it.
I think black people can say nigga anytime they want.
How dare you? What right do you have to use this word?
A lot of nigga questions for the rapper.
What is common to all of us that we can say makes us who we are?
This is the easiest question in the world to answer.
The thing that we have in common is that we are male and we are black.
All right, my question is, I try to live good, but I'm surrounded by bad. And I want to know what it is I could do to do better and live peaceful, surrounded by all evil. How can I do that?
So those questions are just a few of many that we collected, and it was just a life-altering experience to hear the answers. And literally, we would go to someone and ask them to share a question like this.
My question to the black man in America or anywhere else is, what is common to all of us that we can say makes us who we are?
And then we just show it to somebody on a laptop, and they respond probably more.
Our commonality is in our history, but I think our beauty as black people is also in our diversity.
But in speaking to that diversity, that's what I think is fundamental to all of my interests, in that this is work by one of my collaborators, by Tay Ross Smith, and he was really fascinated with how, depending on what he was wearing, people so easily read so much into who he was. But the ultimate struggle for so many of us, but especially for African American men, we can be deduced to something that is seen as to some people as threatening, which makes our lives endangered. And so the goal of the project is to show that we are so many things all at once, and that we cannot be deduced. And so this is actually an image from the Missouri History Museum, where we had the 5-channel installation. It's a 3-hour 5-channel installation, which was an amazing experience because we hadn't known of any to actually be in a museum. And the museum wasn't really prepared, as you can see, for the response. And it's been so far to like 35 different institutions in like 25 different states. And we realize that it's not really about black men, it's about people and what happens when people are put into groups, how they relate to notions of the group itself, how they relate to others in the group, and how they find agency within the confines of these social constructs. So if you go to questionbridge.com, you can see a lot more of the content. And the last project I wanted to talk to you about is called, unless there's more time, I don't know what this is called. Is it called Hope? It's called The Truth Booth, In Search of the Truth. And my work takes many, many forms because I don't want to ever be caught or pigeonholed. And I think about a variety of things and think about how all of us have so many different perspectives. And so we made this piece called The Truth Booth, and it's kind of like a modern day confession booth where you walk in and there's like a touchscreen and it says, everyone has their version of the truth. What's yours? Speak for the next 2 minutes, starting with the truth is. And I love with projects like the Question Bridge and like the Truth Booth, giving the visitor, the audience, the opportunity to actually participate and to make the art. This is us in Ireland, my collaborators, and then they took it to Afghanistan in 2013, which was amazing and heavy, intense. And then just this past winter, we took it to Art Basel at Miami Beach. But I think our crowning moment was making it on the cover of the Washington Post at the presidential debate in 2012. Subliminal messaging and the graphic design. But it was part of my exhibition at the Cleveland Art Museum. And here are some excerpts from early on. Please pardon the sound, but I really love these clips.
The truth is not to be discovered.
Oh, typical me. Was that too loud? Okay.
The truth is not to be discovered because it was there before we were born. It hid itself when we were born, and it only comes out again once we are dead. I'm nearly dead, so the truth will shortly emerge.
I believe the truth is the struggle to find what it really is.
The truth is really small. It's very hard to see. But if you look really, really close, you will find the truth. And it's all around.
It is true that I have got a girlfriend that is named Rian. And it is true that my favorite animal is a dolphin, okay? And that's all I wanted to say.
The truth is, Molly, you're a bitch.
The truth is that I want to be an actor, a dancer, a singer, but I'm not sure how to get into the business. I've joined Trading Places, and, well, I've joined the agency of there, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get into I am in the agency, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get anything out of it. And I just really want to be an actress especially, or maybe a beautician, or a singer maybe, or maybe a dancer, but I'm not sure how to get in. That's the truth. This was an Accident Clean production. I want to say hello to Melody, because she's my little doggy, and all my other pets, and my parents. Peace out.
The truth, I believe, is Lego. Lego makes you think small, but believe big. Lego is in all our minds. So the truth is very, very small, but think big. Thank you. Thank you.
And that little kid just rocked my world. I mean, it's just so amazing what happens when you just give people an opportunity to participate in making art. You know, he's like, the truth is Legos, which is so fundamental but so true. You know, and that's, I think, essentially what all of my work is trying to do, is trying to show that each of us has something to offer, something beautiful to share, and sometimes it's just as simple as letting us look at each other. And this is a collaboration I did with a few friends a long, long time ago, where we just walked around the Bay Area. This is for the Oakland airport, and wanted to show the diversity of the Bay Area. And Bayate, when we were working on the project, actually pointed out, it's like, just because people look different doesn't mean that they're diverse. And just because people look similar doesn't mean that they're the same. But community also isn't as simple as the people that look like us or that speak like us or live near us. That community changes and shifts, and we're all parts of several communities all the time. And it's not as visible on the surface. And so we wanted to make a piece where we just got to like stare at people. So we'd go up to strangers and say, can you stare into the camera for 30 seconds? And we made these mosaics and had this wonderful interaction with, our neighbors, so to speak, a few thousands of them. And I wanted to make work that I felt like was good, but also didn't have so much of a heavy tone that like allowed us to just, how often do we get to just look at people and have people look back at us? So the guy on the right told me that Oakland was the only place he felt safe to live in a tree, and I believe him. She couldn't figure out how to stay still or be quiet, but it was cute. So does anybody have any questions? Thank you. Thanks. It's never happened before. Thank you, guys. Wait, I got to take a picture for my mom. Hold on. Stay right there. That's pretty nice. So does anybody have? Oh, I asked him to make love to the camera. That's it. Yeah. Wow. Enough said then. Okay. What's your question? Tropic Thunder. Go on. Robert Downey Jr. I never made the connection. I've never had a standing ovation. I never made the connection between Tropic Thunder and my work. But I will think more about that. Thank you. Sure. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, so the question is about the term post-blackness that was coined not by Thelma, but she made popular in her, I think maybe the catalog for a show called Freestyle at the Studio Museum. And the basic thesis was that we were at a moment after multiculturalism where artists that didn't have to grow up with segregation as part of their daily lives, some felt free not to make work that was about blackness in an overt way, but it may have done that in more subtle and complex ways. And that term post-blackness was birthed out of that. And sometimes I thought I was post-black, sometimes I thought I wasn't. But I really gained to appreciate, my issue with blackness is that black people didn't create it. You know, I always think that that's the craziest thing about blackness, is that it was created by people with an explicit interest in making us not human. Not to mention my skin is brown, and there's nobody here who has white skin. but we use these binary terms knowing that most people in the world are Asian, and that they range in skin complexion from mine to the lightest person here. And even in Latin America, we see those things, and those terms just don't ever make sense. And so I think with post-blackness, it makes sense to me in an art context, kind of, but it doesn't make sense to me in an actual real context, because blackness doesn't make sense to me. Thanks. See, you shouldn't have said that. Does anybody else have a question? I can show you. I figured I was going to cut short. You want an encore? Hank Willis Thomas encore? I've also never done an encore. And so, but I had a few random pictures left in here from a show. This is from apartheid era. This is a photo romance magazines that they had in apartheid South Africa. And I just love this one because we never thought about romance in the black experience under apartheid. And so I printed in this carborundum, which is a screen print that makes it glisten, but also printed this picture that was also made in the same way, but it's a different kind of notion, but under apartheid. And I thought that they were just two really kind of interesting things to kind of put as a diptych next to each other. But, so it's like this white woman saying terrific as this black couple is kissing under apartheid. I don't know. That's history. You can always remake it. So the project I'm next working on, and you guys will be the first to be able to give me real feedback, it's based on an old project, and I'm going to talk about it real fast. So you ready? It's called, I saw this ad. This is a real ad, and if you have to leave, go ahead and leave. This is a real ad. Do you guys know what it's an ad for? How can you tell it's a Reebok ad? But what's for sale in this Reebok ad? Shoes? Where are the shoes at? What I found so fascinating in this ad from 2005, that there's a Reebok ad where there's no product actually in the ad. So now you don't even have to have a product in it. You have a person who's a musician and a business person who is saying he is who, and we have 3 letters, RBK, and a symbol. And that automatically means shoes to us. And that speaks to how conditioned and trained we are. But this is so, do you guys know who this is? And he says, and the campaign was, I am who I am. And he is apparently a criminal. And then I thought that was problematic, so I went online and saw what else was up, and there was Andy Ruddock. He says he is who he is, and he's a champion. And then they had Lucy Liu, who's just like this innocent little girl. And then they had Yao Ming, who's a monkey on a basketball. And then they had Allen Iverson, who's the devil. And they had Jay-Z, who says, I got my MBA at Marcy Projects. And so he's talking about himself as a drug dealer. And I thought it's fascinating because African-American men are like 5% of the country's population, but represented 3 times in this first iteration of this campaign. And the one black guy is a criminal. The one white guy is a champion, but he does feel bad about it. And then the Asian American woman is this kind of docile, mindless little thing. And then the Chinese giant is something we clearly don't know what to do with. And then the other black guy is the devil, and the other one is a drug dealer. And I started thinking about I think of advertising as a form of social conditioning. Like, what ways do we see ourselves, or options do we see? How does that affect the way people see me, and how does it affect the way that I see the world when these are the reflections that are put out there? And so I started to make work where I take ads and I remove the advertising information. And the last thing that you'd think this was an ad for was Japanese cars. And I realized the potency of ads to actually make random connections between things that just aren't there. And that when you market to a demographic, you actually are literally being prejudiced, because you have to say, these kind of people care about this kind of stuff. So this is an ad. What do you guys think this is an ad for? Pants. And it said, Slack Power, the anti-establishment post-grad slacks by his. And so I started this project back then called Unbranded Reflections in Black by Corporate America from 1968 to 2008. And what do you think this is an ad for? It's obviously an ad for margarine. Thank you very much. Blue Bonnet. But we automatically see the heavyweight boxing champion, Joe Frazier, as a mammy, Aunt Jemima. And so I started to realize there's all these hidden subliminal messages hidden in these images. This is one I found in Ebony magazine in 2005. What do you guys think this is an ad for? It's obviously an ad for kitty litter, because how do you sell kitty litter to black people? Well, black people like watermelon, and what would make watermelon more civilized if all the seeds were in one place? You could just scoop them away, just like our kitty litter. So there's all of this amazing kind of mental jujitsu that we're asked to make, but there's also progress that we see. That 1977, there's an ad where you have a black man and white man sitting at the lunch table, which literally could not have existed 10 years before. And now you have the white man looking longingly at the black man's dark meat, which is a reference to some other things. So there's, but then the subtlety that happens in ads like this, which are for the refreshing feel of a cigarette, where you sit in front of the fan and have the smoke blow back into your face. And even as progress happens in like this 1979 ad, where you see race isn't a factor, these people just happen to be black, but you see gender roles fall into play. So the men play as the women watch, and all of a sudden you see this woman on the left feeding this guy this burger, but if you look at his right hand, there's already burger there. So you can imagine the photographer being like, oh, you need something to do, feed him. And so I really started to think about how these ads, what we buy into when we buy these products. This is an ad for a Chevy and the heartbeat of America, and it talks about, once upon a time in America, there were people who were proud and strong. And they say, so you have the African griot chief, and you have the soldier, and the civil rights activist, and the jazz musician, and the college graduate. And I was looking at it, and I was like, wow, this is really nice. And I was like, wait a minute, somebody's missing. It's like you couldn't sell the heartbeat of America with a picture of like a beat old bloody slave in the middle of it, right? So even in their celebration of black history, they kind of forget like the major aspect of black history. And so I called that Once Upon a Time in America There Were No Slaves, which is how corporate America would have it. So I made this whole huge installation, which was at the Rubel Family Collection, and all 82 images. So the next project I'm making is really thinking about that happened to be bookended by, I started in 1968, the symbolic end of the civil rights movement, to 2008, when we happened to elect the first multi-ethnic president, or the first clearly African-descended president. And I realized that we might be on the verge of another major cultural shift if we do elect a female president in this next round. And so I started this new project called Unbranded: A Century of White Women. And I wanted from 2015 to 1915 to 2015, and I forgot till I started thinking about it that 100 years ago in America, women didn't have the right to vote. Black men technically had the right to vote, but obviously everything was done to make sure that didn't happen, kind of like now. But I thought about kind of whiteness and how a lot of people who are considered white today weren't white back then. Like Russians weren't considered white, and Italians weren't considered white, and Irish weren't considered white, and Jewish people weren't considered white, and Spanish people weren't considered white. And I started to really think about Albanians and think about whiteness as this blob, that people come and move into as a way to have access to power. But also thinking about how women, even white women, have kind of been controlled and policed over this period. And I wanted to look at kind of this construction of female identity, of ideal female identity, and kind of its relationship to other things. And so the project, which I could talk about each of these images for a while goes over the course of the past century, and we see some really fascinating kind of intersections between the paranoia of the time and things like back here, the woman wasn't supposed to be doing anything. She was just supposed to stand there. And then the U.S. goes to war, and she's doing this job that, she should have been ashamed of before, and the men are celebrating. And there's all of these other fascinating things like this ad, which is for a very, very popular Missouri product. Anybody want to guess what this is an ad for? What's the most popular thing that came out of Missouri? Budweiser. it said, hospitality is quickly recognized. And somehow in this Budweiser ad that harkens back to the good old days where hospitality was having someone serve you in this way. I found it so fascinating, all of these different relationships. So she's freed from the refrigerator, but then she tries to go to work and she's in a straitjacket, and she wins the election, but she's in her bra. This is an interesting way to sell lipstick. Or no seams on your dress. And then how to encourage people not to use those outdated girdles or corsets with bones. Drag her, come out of the bone age, darling, is what this said. Or this one from 1959, men are better than women. Indoors, women are pleasant, even useful, but outdoors, they're somewhat of a drag. So you can show off this sweater. This is an ad for sweaters, but this is actually corporate America's response to not just quote unquote white women, but people trying to find equality, and these kind of really this violence that we see in these ads that are depicted against white women who are seen in many ways as the most valuable people in our society really speaks to like how were they treating the rest of us, and that's what I'm becoming really interested in. And like if these are the images that are for the people who Emmett Till got killed for whistling at, what does that say? You know, and I wanted to really speak about this stuff by looking at these images that, you know, don't make much sense to me. This is for Campari, you know, try one in your cage, it said. These are for the pants, Ring Around Rosie or Carol or Cindy, etc. And then the women start to fight back, but they dress like men. In this Canada Dry ad, this is an interesting way to get out of a ticket. Some might say, give your daughter a daughter. This project is really kind of fascinating for me because of all the things that I'm learning about our society's values, but through a different kind of market, so to speak. And this fascinating kind of thing that kind of starts to end around here with Mother Nature has met her match. As we start to make place for new people in this paradigm. This seems like a bummer. What do you guys say? It's going to be weird, huh? Anybody have any comments? You going to throw tomatoes at me? Please. You weren't supposed to, but she was there. And it's for the white linens. And well, I mean, but beauty is, my mother would say that beauty is a contentious space, and that we forget that it was necessary for many people in our society. It was an oxymoron to say that you were black and beautiful. And I don't know why I have so many slides, but I just had one of these things, the last thing I swear in here. But I did this project called Black is Beautiful that's up at the Studio Museum, and it's basically every Jet magazine Beauty of the Week from 1953 to 2014. But What's interesting about Black beauty, and these magazines which had the agenda to show Black beauty, that most of the people were light-skinned with long hair from the beginning, and they're over the course of the 6 decades that many of the people here were born each of these weeks. So this is a timeline of female objectification. So we're clapping about it, but we're really just clapping at women in bikinis as something that's supposed to be something that we celebrate, which I'll celebrate any day, privately. But even in these gestures of making a political positive statement, we're still reducing people. And that's what I think I'm constantly trying to tackle and deal with the work. And it doesn't matter if you're a quote-unquote white male or a Black male or a Latino or Asian or Pacific Islander or South Asian or, you know, many, many other transgender. Like, as soon as you're marketed to, you're no longer a human being. And exactly where the beauty of art spaces is that, he gave me the time symbol, is that we go into these spaces where you can do things when you walk into the contemporary galleries, and there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense to us immediately, and it challenges us to think about how we live in a world and look at things that never will make sense to us, but we have to wrestle with every day. And so, no more standing ovations. Please, please, please. Thank you very much. I was out of slides anyway. Thank you for your question.